Hey all! With Season 2 of New World right around the corner, I thought I'd do another overview of the spear build I use for soloing elite chest runs, expeditions, and the occasional mid-level mutation. Since I only play the PvE side of this game, and casually at that, I can't really speak to what more experienced players are doing, only what works for me, so take all this with a grain of salt. For as long as I can remember, I've been running a slightly modified version of the PvE DPS build I found on Icy Veins. The only notable difference between my build and the recommended one is that I take Vault Kick instead of Sweep. This is because the animation lock triggered by Vault Kick is shorter and includes movement, making it less risky to use during incoming attacks than Sweep. It also stuns and staggers, meaning it works in a lot of situations where the Sweep knockdown doesn't, with the caveat that it's more challenging to hit multiple enemies at once with it. But most importantly, Continuous Motion, that's the third point in Vault Kick, reduces all spear cooldowns by 30% on hit. This, combined with invigorating crits, refreshing jabs, and aggressive maneuvers, makes for a lot of cooldown reduction, to the point where there's no real downtime if you're frequently landing both hits in the light attack chain between abilities. This makes the build extremely friendly to players like myself who aren't great at following a strict rotation or juggling priorities on more than one weapon at a time. Especially when I'm having to dodge multiple enemies at a time, solo combat without grit means any rotation I'd normally follow gets thrown out anyways, so this works out pretty well for me. Alternatively, since Cyclone is becoming more viable in Season 2, this presents an opportunity for some serious cleave damage, replacing Vault Kick and making the Leeching Cyclone weapon perk extremely appealing. I still feel like Vault Kick is more versatile and slippery, but if I'm in an area where I can take some hits without dying, this new and improved Cyclone might be a pretty viable option. But back to my current build. The perks Enfeebling Skewer and Fortifying Perforate help me take hits when I need to, typically with the Skewer perk on my spear for increased effect, and Fortifying Perforate on a piece of armor. This is a complete 180 from the days of pre-nerf Fortify, since Fortify scales with armor now, but having Fortifying Perforate on a spear and Enfeebling Skewer on armor still works under certain conditions. If you're running heavy armor and find yourself in a multi-target spread where you can't really skewer everything at once to apply Weaken, Fortify might be a safer bet for shoring up some defensiveness. Between Impactful Strikes and Enfeebling Skewer on a piece of armor, you're still getting decent coverage on Weaken, but again, this is pretty conditional, so I still prefer my Skewer perk to be the stronger one. There's also Keen Vault Kick, which isn't essential to the build, but it's definitely worth looking for. A little extra crit means more damage, means more stamina regen through invigorating crits. Definitely one to put on your list. So what it boils down to, really, is maintaining Weaken on enemies and Fortify on myself while striking a balance between dodging, light attacks, and Vault Kick when it fits. This simplicity makes it easier for me to stay in rhythm while I'm dodging, and the lack of downtime makes switching weapons practically unnecessary in a lot of fights. As for my attributes, I like to run 300 Dexterity with 100 Strength and 100 Constitution, but there's tons of room for flexibility as long as you can keep 50 Strength for 10% more basic attack damage, and 150 Dexterity for cheaper dodge. You could even run 300 Constitution and still hit those requirements, but I personally wouldn't, since that'll cost you a lot of damage. I've had success with this build in all three weight classes, though I typically stick to light or heavy. I like to run light for outdoor content and parts of expeditions where I'm confident I can dodge all the incoming damage, but for fights where I'm frequently staggered or where I need to be able to recover from frequent mistakes, I find heavy is way better suited. With that in mind, I want to talk about gearing. While my overall build relies on dodging to stay alive, I also lean pretty heavily into defensiveness and self-healing through perks. On my amulet, I run Stamina Recovery, Health, and Fortified for improved uptime on my Perforate perk. I had to buy this one at the trading post, but there are plenty of decent alternatives like Purify, Sacred, or Empowered. On my ring, I run Leeching, Hardy, and Keen Awareness. Right now I'm using a crafted one, but you can farm up Smooth Bone Ring pretty easily. That's a random drop from the Lazarus expedition, and it's the same as mine, but with full strength. For my earring, I'll wear anything with Refreshing Toast and Regenerating. The third perk is extra unless you're in a situation where you need to be able to clear a debuff at a moment's notice, in which case you'll want Purifying Toast. There are a couple named earrings you can farm that have Refreshing as a third perk, one with full dex and the other with full strength. The first is Invoked by Her 2 lands, and the other is Doom's Chance Earring. For my spear, anything with Enfeebling Skewer and Lifestealing is a perfect start. I feel like there's not a lot of pressure to find a good third perk for a soloing spear, but if I had to choose, I'd go with Arboreal Attunement, Vicious, Keen, or an appropriate Bane if I'm gearing for a particular enemy type. If I need a full set of gear, I'll check the trading post for armor with the weapon perks I want, plus an appropriate ward if I'm building a set for expeditions, mutators, or a specific enemy type. If I'm not looking for anything that specific, I'll look for refreshing or something widely useful like vigor, and if I'm building a light set, I'll make sure to get pants with shirking energy. Whenever I have the materials and coin to spare, I'll craft Shadeweave Light or Orichalcum Heavy gear with golden scarabs, so I can guarantee attributes plus 2 perks. With the expansion coming later this year, I can't possibly recommend rerolling for 3rd perks, but you really don't need to. For gems, I run Runeglass of Arboreal Opal on my spear, Runeglass of Punishing Onyx on armor, and Pristine Onyx on jewelry. I run Onyx for everything but my weapon because elemental attacks in PvE are less frequent and easier to dodge. But there are definitely certain settings, like Dynasty Shipyard, where I've heard people like to stack elemental resistance more than physical, so it's up to you. Now I want to talk about secondary weapons. I've already said I don't swap weapons often, but the ones I find most useful are the bow and Void Gauntlet. Spear bow is a pretty well-rounded pairing. My bow build isn't really optimized for anything, but I do like Evade Shot and Rapid Shot, with or without their weapon perks. But it doesn't directly improve the way I use my spear, which is the only downside. Spear and Void Gauntlet, on the other hand, work really well together. Since the Void Gauntlet doesn't scale at all with Dex or Strength, I grab all the useful abilities and slot whichever ones I need when I need them. For most content, I'll run Essence Rupture, Oblivion, and Orb of Decay if I want something to pull with. I'm thinking about replacing Orb with Baleful Tether since Season 2 is bringing a new change allowing the tether to persist through weapon swaps. Essence Rupture gives me access to self-healing and stamina regeneration after I've swapped back to my spear, which is great if I'm recovering from or about to take a lot of damage. Oblivion empowers me and buffs my stamina regen while I'm in it, which can save my life if I accidentally zero out my stamina or if I'm anticipating having to dodge a lot more than I can normally afford. Getting a Void Gauntlet to pair with the spear is incredibly easy. All I look for is one with a useful attribute and Refreshing Rupture, which reduces Essence Rupture's cooldown to about the same as its duration, as long as it hits an enemy. On top of all this, it's easy to pick up a bit of utility by grabbing a piece with Nullifying Oblivion or Putrefying Scream, for example, for niche situations. 2 other weapons I've paired with Spear are Warhammer and Musket. The Warhammer is extremely easy to swap to for a quick stun, that's Wrecking Ball or Shockwave, and both of these have Grit, which is even better. Personally, I like to run Clear Out with the perk for it on my weapon, not because it's efficient, but because it's really satisfying treating enemies like golf balls. And finally, I can't recommend pairing a spear with a musket for most content, especially with the nerf to aim, making my shitty aim even shittier, but for basic leveling or fighting trappable enemies, the Scent of Blood skill is still pretty useful. Scent of Blood causes you to heal for 100% of the damage you deal to any enemy who have trapped. That means if you're at low health fighting a single enemy and you trap them, a quick swap back to Spear followed by a few light attacks or Perforate can easily top you off. I did a lot of this when I leveled my first character to 60, and I'm embarrassed by how bad I was back then, but it was also incredible how much it healed for, so I had to mention it. With that, I think I've covered the basics of the build I run. I still get the occasional question or comment about my old Spear video, so I really just wanted to refresh it with some current notes and information. That being said, I hope you found this useful, or at the very least interesting, and until next time, thank you so much for watching. Have a good one.